Who are you? Beneath the expectations, the labels, and the societal conditioning, what does it truly mean to become you? I'm John Fleming, the founder and lead practitioner of Becoming You. I created Becoming You out of a desire to share my own experience of becoming myself and to support others who are curious about who they are. From a young age, I have been driven by a desire to figure out who I am, why I'm here, and how I can belong while being myself. This is Becoming You, the podcast. Conversations about uncovering, embracing, and being your true self. A place where I dive deep into what it means and what is required to live life as your most authentic self. Through real, honest, and grounded conversations with professionals and people who are walking the path. If you're curious about identity, authenticity, and personal freedom, your own or others, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Moira, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, John, for having me.
Good. Great to have you here and to be connecting with you again after a few years of not having much contact.
Yeah.
Moira, before we get stuck into what we're going to talk about today, which is limiting beliefs, the last guest, which actually was me, has a question for you to open up the podcast episode. And that is, when do you remember first realizing that you had a connection with yourself?
What a question. When do I remember first? I think I was in my teenage years. It's interesting because I think I actually thought about this today when I was on my walk.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because it was something, I was thinking about something to do with religion when I was walking. Yes, because I was in touch with somebody recently and they were supporting people through business, but they had a very heavy slant on religion, which is absolutely fine if that suits people. And I was thinking, about me and religion and different things growing up and how I was conditioned. And I remember, literally the answer to your question is, I remember having, I was about 15, and I can remember reading a piece of the Bible. Now, we weren't that religious at home that had loads of Bibles around the place, but I just must have got my hands on a Bible somewhere. And I was reading a bit of it, and I can remember it was the first time I felt that connection with myself through the words in the Bible. Having said that, now I'm not really religious now. I would say I'm very spiritual now, and that was the whole thing that I was thinking about, the way that we were conditioned with religion. Well, for me personally, there was an awful lot of fear around it, and I don't believe that if there is a God and he is all loving, should we be frightened? But I can remember there was something in the words of what I read, and I got very excited about it, and I felt I'm home. Yeah, I can't even remember what it was now, but I was quite surprised by it at that age. Yeah.
I think that's beautiful. And again, at a relatively young age, right?
Yes. Yeah. Which kind of surprised me today when I was thinking about it. I was thinking, God, that was quite young to be that tuned into, that connection with myself. Yeah.
And that's so interesting because it's a similar thing for me, which I will have talked about in the last episode. And I just distinctly remember staring in the mirror. I was about 8 years old. And I'd looked in the mirror lots of times probably, but this particular time I looked at myself and I looked at myself looking back at myself and I was like, oh my God, that's you.
Yeah.
And I had this outer body experience and I was like, oh, you're a person I have a connection with, because there was that externalization of self all of a sudden. Fascinating.
Yeah. And mine was like an internalization. It was the first time I went in and really connected with what was, when I was reading and felt, oh my goodness, I've come home to something internally that I'd never recognized was there, because I was always looking externally.
So Moira, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do professionally?
Okay. So Moira Geary is my name. I'm also known as the Recombobulator, which means that, the way we all get a bit discombobulated in life, I help people to recombobulate themselves. And I pride myself on the fact that I do it in a very practical, no nonsense, down to earth, as easy as possible, simple techniques. And I share them with people, I load them for free. And then obviously people come on programs and things like that with me. But what I say to people is, don't bother coming near me unless you're willing to implement, because I can give you everything that I know. And I know that the stuff works because I'm at this, I don't know. I suppose I'm at it 30 years, but I'm not at it professionally that long. But I'm at this professionally a long time, I suppose 2007, 8, 9, that kind of time. But the big thing is, people will come and they'll say, oh, have you got advice on this? Can you help me with that? Whatever. And even I noticed it on Instagram a lot recently that an awful lot, I do Q&As, but like, it's great to answer the questions. But as I always say to people, there's no point me answering the question unless you don't go and do something with the techniques. So that would be very much kind of my energy and my slant and my expectation of working with people. And it all started, I suppose, because maybe at around that age of 15, I remember actually not too long, I would say around that time, a little bit after it, the first proper book I bought myself was a book called Man Watching by a guy called Desmond Morris. And it was all about body language and being able to get a sense of why people do what they do, and there might be telltale signs with the way they move their body and etc. So I was fascinated with that and fascinated with people and why people do what they do. And I was very fortunate to get into nursing and to have the privilege of being exposed to people in all dynamics of life, huge grief, huge sadness, elation. And so I did both general nursing and I did midwifery as well. So I was really exposed, and it was fascinating watching different people and how they responded to what was going on and how they reacted and behaved towards it and to it. Then I always would have been that practical head, focus on the positive, great at reframing if things weren't great, and would have considered myself, a really positive person, upbeat, and even though life wasn't perfect, that I was managing really well. And then in the meantime, nursed, got married, left Ireland, went to London, worked in London, was exposed to an awful lot of other things abroad that weren't available in Ireland at the time. So all sorts of personal development work, spiritual work. I mean, I would have done Reiki before. If anybody here in Ireland knew that I was doing Reiki, they would have thought I was after joining a cult. And, it's so commonplace here now. So I did lots of things, an awful lot of personal development stuff, and learned a lot of stuff, and learned a lot about myself, which was great. Had one baby, was pregnant with second, decided to come home, and then had a third, and then decided that I would stay at home mainly and then do little bits and bobs, outside of that, things that I was interested in. And what happened next was that I ended up going into a very deep state of anxiety. And I would say a sense or feeling of, that kind of a dark, depressed, low, flat state as well. And it wasn't postnatal depression. I was too far beyond having the boys for it to have been that. And when I got to the root of it, and just to point out, it lasted about 4 years, as in the going into it, stuck into it and coming out the other side. I basically, there were certain parts of that where I wasn't functioning, and it was quite debilitating. So yeah, I learned an awful lot about myself, and I know that we had a quick conversation before we came on here. I learned an awful lot about myself and how my mind works, how my behaviors work, the reasons why I was in that state, which was primarily fear of rejection. I was afraid that I was going to be rejected by the world if I stepped out in a business. And when I stepped out, the fear came up at such a heightened state that I was paralyzed and wasn't able to step forward. And it rooted back to a couple of things. One was a fantastic relationship I had with my dad, because I absolutely adored him, and he would have really applauded, doing well, setting goals, achieving them, and, working hard and blah, blah, blah. And I was addicted to that acknowledgement. And when it came to Leaving Cert, I didn't do a very good Leaving Cert. And I felt that without even realizing it, because it happened, and then I blocked it all, but I felt that I'd let everybody down, and I felt deep shame and all the rest of it. So that fear of, not belonging to the clan and being an outsider and, worried about being rejected around that. And then when I went nursing, I actually failed my surgery, which was my better subject. No idea how that happened. And then there was another build-up of that shame and whatever. But I was great at blocking it and pushing it down. It wasn't until I went to step out and start the business that I went into complete anxiety, really. And then I had to step back and learn about myself, work it out, figure it out, and relieve myself of that anxiety, which I did, which was fabulous. And like I was saying to you, that's a lot of years ago. And a lot of people would think, oh, but Moira, you do all this work, you've been doing it for years, look at all the people you've helped, look at all the results they get, and you yourself. And they think that life is perfect all the time. It absolutely isn't. We're all human beings with beautiful egos and, human experiences. And we are spiritual beings as well, I believe. But in that human experience, we're here to learn and grow. So I've just come out of another dip that I had recently, which was all around grief. And it was very interesting, not pleasant, very interesting. But one thing I'd say, and I know, John, you're the same, when something like that happens, now it's only happened to me twice in my life. When something like that happens, I am gloves off, let's do the work and let's work this out and let's see what's going on or whatever. So yeah, this episode was very much centered around grief, and it wasn't necessarily grief of losing people or people dying, even though 2 people close to me had died. But it was other grief, and grief of parts of myself, as well as my 3 boys leaving home over a period of time. And it wasn't them leaving, it was my reaction and response to that, because what I had understood that my role was with them for 30 years, and really coming to terms with what that was. And a lot of it was around control. It was very interesting and a fabulous relationship. I get on great with my boys. They're men now. The eldest is 30 and Connor, the youngest, is 25. But I get on really, really well with them. But I definitely now can see that there were parts of me that needed the relationship to be the way it was, because I hadn't experienced that in other areas of my life growing up. So interesting dynamic anyway. So that's where I'm at. And I suppose some of the blips along the way, that if you don't have those, I believe that it's very hard to learn the stuff, because it's really in the experience of it. That's where we learn deeply. And over the years, I've supported people. I've supported thousands of people. I mean, I've a great following on Instagram. I think there's about 96,000 people there. There's 25 or 30,000 on Facebook. I have a Facebook group with 14,000, loads of people on my email list. And I give a load away for free, because I believe that no soldier should ever be left behind, and that give people a taste, give them stuff that they can use, that's tangible, that can help them, little techniques and tools. And then if they want to, they can go on to a program. And actually, to be honest, in the last 2 years, I didn't really run that many programs, because I was working on myself. And I really feel that out of integrity, me turning up to hold space for people, which is fine, and I can do it, but I felt I was actually doing myself a disservice. I knew that I needed to look after me, so I stepped back a bit, but I'm back out again. But I think that's very important, that if anybody's in this line of work, that they understand that, you know, it's important that you respect your own energy and also respect the energy of other people, because if you go to hold space, that's a big responsibility to hold space for people. So
I am so intrigued by something, because, you know, everything you've shared, thank you, first of all, for being so open and sharing so much. And I'm so inspired by your tenacity, you know, because 4 years is a long time. And I'm wondering about your connection to yourself during that time, and what that was like, in the sense of, you know, did that come up? Was that the thing that kept you going? What did get you through the 4 years?
the beginning was that I was in it for, I would say, the best part of a year, and I was in total denial, apart from my husband knew. So Jeff was great, as in I felt that he was there and supporting me. But Jeff would never be the type that would tell me what to do or make me do something, or try, you know, he wasn't trying to fix things. He felt that I was okay and able to maneuver it anyway myself. But it got to a point where he said, actually, no, I think it's time now. We need to go to a doctor. You need help. And it's not okay for you to be like this, whatever. So we did go to my GP, and I was offered antidepressants and counselling. That's what we decided on. And unfortunately, at the time, I didn't understand. And since then, I've done an MA in psychotherapy, so I do understand now. But I didn't understand that there were so many different types of counselling. And what I needed was somebody that would, a bit like myself, bring me in, listen to me with curiosity, to try and work out what actually was going on through asking me good questions, and for me to work it out. And then from there, that we would have an action plan to see what we could do to bring me through it or out of it. But the type of counselling I got was very, very gentle, nice, but there was no movement in it. And I decided that, and I went to 3 different counsellors and got the same thing from all 3. So I decided that counselling wasn't going to help me. So that was unfortunate that I didn't understand. But maybe it wasn't unfortunate, because I kind of worked it out myself. And I suppose that gave me that strength to believe in myself, and that I have had the ability. And that was, you know, you're talking about me connecting to myself. That was when it came to the point where I suppose I realized that, yeah, maybe just have a deeper look at yourself and see, from what you know already, what can you work out. And I'll give you a very simple thing in the early days that hugely helped me. And it's something that I would use an awful lot now, but not, obviously, I don't work with people with depression or, well, people get anxious and people might be in a depressed state, but that's not clinical depression, and they're completely different. So it's really important that people understand that. But something as simple as having a purpose. Having a purpose in your day when you're feeling that low and that dark and that frightened. So what I mean by that is I would have a list, a to-do list, and might have three things on it. One would be to wash the kitchen floor, one would be to decide to make a dinner, and it might be to have a shower. Because anybody that's been in that stage, they know that the last thing you feel like is even having a shower, washing your hair, whatever. And when I tick those things off, I actually got a buzz. So I got that dopamine hit. So it brought me out of the state just temporarily. And when I felt that feeling, I went, okay, if I can feel that feeling for even 5 minutes, I can definitely increase the period of time that I can feel. So I have the ability to feel the feeling. It's just that I'm not in the right space to, to feel it for long periods of time. So that was something very simple that I started with to help me along the way. And lots of other things like that, and changing my state and lots of other things that helped me.
I'm so taken by what you said about, I went to 3 different counselors and I got the same thing and I knew it wasn't what I needed. And the bit that I'm really intrigued about is I knew that it's not what I needed. So it's like that part of you was so alive. So it might have been not clear what you needed or where you were going to get it, but you knew it wasn't that.
Yeah, absolutely. And even at the time, like I can remember a frustration, not with the people because they were beautiful people, but I just could feel this frustration. It was more frustration in myself for not being clear on what actually I needed. Yeah.
And I think that so many people experience that on their journey through life. That's like, for me, it's like my little internal alarm bell going off, going, no, not that. Steer away from that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rather than people saying, try this, try that, try the other. And then I've seen this where people follow that and they're doing everything that everybody else is telling them rather than coming in and trusting that intuition and that instinct that you have. And getting I get a very clear, now I rely on that. Recently, I was coming back. I haven't run an event in 2 years. And recently I was thinking, okay, is the time to run an event? All I had to do was go into that question internally. So again, going within, like I did that day with the Bible, and going in and asking myself, am I ready to do a live event? And my body gave me an absolutely clear yes. I felt it in my body, completely yes. Then I asked myself, was I ready to take on a new intake of practitioners that I train? And I got a half yes. It was veering towards a no. So I just trust my body, trust my instinct. And it always works out. And even that event, I tell you, the funniest thing, I decided, okay, I put it out there. I have no idea now because 2 years since I ran an event. Sure, people might have forgotten about events. It sold out in less than 48 hours. That'll just show you, being so clear on an answer and knowing not that it was right necessarily just for me, but it felt right for other people.
I think that's such an important part of the journey of embracing yourself, because it's many things. Embracing your intuition is part of that, and you're losing that then as a compass in life.
Yes.
Yeah, such an important
And
thing.
it takes a bit of time to, because anybody listening now is thinking, what in the name of God are they talking about? You've got the ego in your head trying to, look good and all the rest of it. And a lot of our decisions are made through that. So the old me might have run an event because I didn't want to let people down. I wanted to be seen to be running an event, to be seen to have a full room, whatever. And that's all ego-based, fear-driven. But the intuition is very different. It's very soft and it's a truth. It's like, it's just a feeling in your body that just feels right. Whereas with the ego, when my ego starts making decisions, I get a bit jittery and flummoxed and sometimes overexcited. And that's one thing I have to often pull myself in. Okay, this overexcitement, what's that about? Are you trying to be seen as something, or are you overexcited because truly this is going to make an impact or a difference for people? And that's kind of how I know. But I just pull back and ask myself questions, go within. Yeah.
I mean, we are already talking about limiting beliefs indirectly. For people who this is a completely new term, Moira, what would you define a limiting belief as?
Well, what I'd say first is if I start with a belief and then I'll talk about the difference between a limiting and an empowering belief. So a belief is basically an idea or a notion that we have in our head. Starts as an idea or a notion that we have about something. And we create our beliefs through our experiences. So if you think about it, we have 5 senses and we all are experiencing things all day, every day. And when we're experiencing things, we're literally a physical body in the middle of something that's going on outside of us. When that thing is going on outside of us, we bring the information in through our 5 senses. And in the bringing it in, we're deleting a lot of it, we're distorting a lot of it, we're generalizing a lot of it based on our past experiences, because it makes it very quick for us to make an assessment of what's going on. So when we delete, distort, and generalize, bring the information into our subconscious, we then create what we call an internal representation or an internal visual or an internal idea of what just happened. Up to that point, it's got no power, it's got no energy. It's not until the next step that then it starts to become a belief. And that's when we put meaning on it. So we decide it means something. So an example would be that, the fact that I might be in a room when I was a child with my siblings and something went on. It might be something very exciting, or it might be something traumatic. And I'm sure you've experienced this now. I'm sure most people listening will have experienced this. Then 30 years later, or 10 years later, 5 years later, you're with your siblings and you're chatting about the day that such and such happened. And everybody has a completely different story and belief about what actually happened. And it's not that the thing was different, and it's not that people didn't see it in the same, like through their eyes and experience the same thing. It is how they internally created a representation and the meaning they put on it. So that's where our beliefs come from. And they start with an idea or a notion. So they're quite mild and quite insipid. Or they could be, for one where you've got a massive limiting belief that'll come in and lock in very quickly or very hard, would be maybe a traumatic event or an event where there was huge elation. So just let's say you were an Irish dancer and you were on stage and you won some big competition. You didn't actually expect to win it, but you won it. And the elation and the feelings in your body, the internal representation, all things that happened, you would actually lock that in really, really hard. And it would create a belief that I am really good, I'm confident, I'm capable, I'm able, la la la. The same could happen if you stood up in class in school and you went to sing a song and people laughed at you and the teacher said, no, it's okay, we'll have John sing the song, or Mary or whatever, instead of you. So what you probably would do there is, again, bring all the information in, delete, distort, generalize, feel a feeling of deep shame, and then you would lock in the internal representation and the meaning to that feeling. Now, the important thing about a belief is actually it's more of the feeling that's important rather than what we say, like I'm confident or I'm not worthy or whatever. It's actually the feeling that goes with it. And they start off with those, either a big event like that, where a belief will get wired in quite deep, or it could be lots of small events where we get this idea or notion that we are a certain way. Somebody might look at you funny and you think, oh, why are they looking at me funny? Does that mean that there's something wrong with me? I'm not as good as other people or whatever. But it mightn't be a strong one. And then something similar might happen, or your subconscious goes searching to compound things to be true. So your subconscious is looking out to see, oh, I wonder, am I worthy, or am I okay, or am I good enough? And you might collect a lot of those notions. And the more you have the notions or opinions, the deeper it goes, and then it turns into a conviction. And that's where you get a very strong belief. Now, a lot of them can be, like you're saying, limiting or disempowering. And then we have thousands of fantastic empowering ones as well. But in this line of work, we generally focus on the disempowering ones. Yeah. And I always explain to people when they think about the notion and the idea, if you think of it a little bit like the way I presented it actually to groups online, is I'd have my tripod, a small tripod, actually I have one here as well, but a small tripod like this here, and I'd have my phone up on it. And the idea would be that the phone would represent the experience or the idea or the notion. And it literally has no leg to stand on when the tripod is closed. So it doesn't have any legs. So it's going to fall over because it's not strong. But then when we start putting all of these legs under it, which is compounding it to be true, then it gets stronger, 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 and then it becomes locked in. So the way to work on them is obviously go in reverse. You still have the belief, but what you do is you start questioning and doubting the legs of your tripod. And once you do that with good questioning, your mind and your brain and your ego goes, oh, maybe it's not true. Maybe it's not true. So you start to release the energy out of it. Yeah.
And what I'm really curious about with regards to these, because I'm very preoccupied, as you can tell, about this connection to self, is that it has been my own experience that when they doesn't have a leg to stand on anymore, that it frees up all of this energy so that you can connect to yourself and you can say, well, what do I want to believe? What is true for me?
Yeah. Or what could be true for me, even if you don't believe it already, you can, because all you need to do is decide what you want to believe. That's a notion. And then you go and you start looking for evidence or taking action to prove to yourself that you can be or do or whatever that thing. But you're right about the connection to yourself, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, and that release of energy in itself is so cathartic.
It's wow. It's just so spacious, so open, so peaceful, so divine. It's just beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, a word you could probably use actually that would fit limiting beliefs is that they're oppressive, aren't they? They're
Mhm.
oppressive to self.
Yes. And constricting.
Yeah. Yeah. When you're working with people, Moira, how do you go about working on these disempowering or limiting beliefs?
Yeah, so I kind of use two different ways, and it's interesting that you actually asked me. And for the 2 hours before I came on the call, I was actually prepping for tomorrow. So I'm working with a group in a corporate tomorrow. They're actually nurses, and we are actually working on beliefs. And so with them, what I would do in a group is I had a series of questions. So I talked to them about what I just talked about with you here now, because we've got to get the conscious and conscious mind to understand how they're set up. If the subconscious understands what things are, it is much more open to releasing and dropping the need to try and control things. So that's what I would do first is I would talk about where beliefs come from and get them to give me examples of their own beliefs. And then I would, through a series of questions, and they're very specific questions where you would answer yes or no. You only got a yes or a no answer to them, to shake up the strength of their conviction that that belief might be true. So it questions the belief, and the answers are always that there is another answer. There always is another answer. So that's one way. And it can be just through those questions. What you're doing is you're taking the legs out from under the phone on the tripod. And once the legs are gone, then you can say, okay, well, what would you like to put in? And then you compound that belief, and then you get them then to take action on the new belief. Because once we take action on a new belief, then the subconscious mind realizes, oh my God, I can do that. Then that's a new belief created. And it starts to embed at a neurological level. So if we go back to Hebb's law, which I'm sure most of your listeners will have heard of, which is that neurons that fire together, wire together. So what you're looking for is to take action so that you feel really good about something that you're doing in relation to this new belief. When you do that, you're going to have an emotional response and reaction to that. And when you do that, what you're doing is you're creating neural pathways that will line up with that belief, so it compounds it to be true. So it's important. That's where people need to do the work. It's a saying, I can teach it, tell you all the stuff and whatever, but it's actually about putting it into action. So that would be the first way I would work on beliefs. And there's another way, just to briefly say, I've done a lot of training, all sorts of weird and wonderful personal development trainings, and some of them there aren't even names on it. And I'd mix stuff and mash it all together, whatever. And actually, I developed and created my own modality called QTT, which is I stripped away a lot of the stuff that made things long and laborious and just shortened them and made them quick and easy. And part in there, and I never actually trained as a timeline therapist, but I would definitely use some timeline work because it's very powerful. And how that works is that, well, we don't know how it works. It's a bit like electricity. If you flick on a light, the lights come on, but we're not sure of the actual mechanism of it. But basically, when you help somebody to identify on their timeline where their belief might have started, what you're doing is you're working with them to release the energy out of the belief, so that when they don't have the feeling or the energy about the belief anymore, the belief can't be true because you can't feel it. So it's not impacting your life in a negative way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's invigorating stuff. Like, even just hearing you talk about it, I get this sense from how you talk about it, how passionate you are about it and about getting this out in the world, because you know how oppressive or restrictive
Yes.
it
I've
can be.
experienced it. Yeah.
Yeah.
We all have, really. Yeah. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be that way, which is amazing. Yeah.
I'm really curious about, because you said earlier you've been doing this for 30 years, about, during that time, how your thoughts or the way you've worked has ebbed and flowed or changed or refined. Like, what have been the most significant changes you've made to how you work with disempowering or limiting beliefs over that time?
Over that time, I suppose, starting out, it's like everything. When you start something, you're maybe good at it and you understand it and you know it. But And maybe it's the nurse in me. I'm a great believer in taking out steps that are not necessary. So I would have tried different things. So it would have been processes or techniques that I would have found really work with clients. And then I think, oh, if we take that step out and that step out, or an example would be at work with clients using timeline on emotions. So somebody has an emotion, let's say a business person comes to me and they say, I'm just petrified. I just cannot step out of my comfort zone and go into sales calls or whatever it is. So we work out, well, what's going on for you? So what is the fear in the now? And then we see if we can relate it back to where did it start. So it might have started in school, might have started with somebody bullying somebody or a teacher, or it might be a colleague or a friend, or we don't know where it will start. But anyway, there was somewhere where there was a neurological pattern set up. So in the early years, I would have got the person to list out all of the different emotions that they were feeling, and we would have taken them individually and worked on each one to release it individually. Oh, I can tell you, 3 years into it, I'm thinking, I'm losing the will to live here. This is repeating the same thing over and over. So I started to batch things. So we found much faster ways of getting the same result, but not having to be as laborious about it. So that definitely would be one thing. And I know that I'm good at that. I'm able to see how the technique works, the steps of it, and all we need in it. But I'd be able to see the elements too that I'm not quite sure if we actually need it that way, or let's do it a different way and try it out. So that definitely speeded things up over the years. And I also, when you asked me that question, it's interesting because I think I went back to maybe 15, 20 years ago, and there are things that I teach and say now in exactly the same way that I said then because they work. I wouldn't change them for anything. I would absolutely not change them for anything. And there's no need to complicate it. There's no need to make it any more fancy. Keep it simple. Simple things like I created a framework for people understanding why we do what we do called the 7 Behavioral Codes. I will never not teach that because it makes so much sense and it's so simplistic for people to understand why they do what they do. And it is massive in helping people to understand why others do what they do. And a lot of people would come to me because, when I say come to me, I don't do one-to-ones, but a lot of people that come into my world would be people that really don't want to live in a conflicting world. They don't want to have conflict with other people. And one of our biggest issues in life is other people and how we react and respond to them. But to be able to understand why people do what they do, and then what we apply is the golden rules. So living in non-judgment and respecting that everybody has their own unique model of the word. We can see everybody do what they're doing. In the past, it would have driven us insane, but we're totally at peace. And we're still able to stand our ground and be very clear about our values and if a boundary was crossed. And I think that is very, very important as well. I think I wouldn't change that. That's just, it's just magic and it's gold. And there's no point in changing it or complicating it anymore. It's a very simple way of giving people that freedom.
Yeah. I love what you said a while ago as well about the neuroscience of it, because I think actually that's something for people to really anchor on.
Yeah.
Because, you're always going to get people who do want to change, but they're maybe very intellectual and they're like, is this just hocus pocus? And it's like, well, no, actually, we can explain to you what's happening in your brain about how it's reorganizing itself and that's scientifically proven, actually.
And actually, in the early days, I'm sure a lot of the stuff I was doing maybe was scientifically proven, but there wouldn't have been that many research papers on it, but it was working. So it was working. But something as simple, John, it's something as simple as this. People would come to me, or even actually yesterday, and I'll be answering this on Instagram now tonight. Somebody put up a question. I said, any questions? And one person asked a question, said, I'm totally overwhelmed. Have you any tips for me? And straight away, anybody that would have a doubt about the neuroscience of it or whatever, I would say you don't need to read research papers. Experience it. So what I'd say to anybody listening to this, okay, if you're saying to yourself, God, I'm really angry, or I'm really frustrated, or I'm really irritated, or I'm really overwhelmed. Just even by using those words, what you've done is identified yourself as the thing or the feeling. And if you just literally just feel in your body what that feels like, that's a neurological response to what you've just said, that I am angry, I am overwhelmed. And even if you think about it there, John, while I'm talking, you'll get a sense of it because you have felt those things in your life. But then if I just say to you, just change it to, I'm doing overwhelm. I'm doing anger. What that does is it completely changes the neurological response. And actually for me, when I say that I'm really angry, whatever, I actually feel guilty. That's one of my feelings. But when I say I'm doing anger, I feel, I'm only doing it for a few minutes, or I'm doing it in response to that. It's not me. I am not angry. I am doing anger. And you don't have to, as I say, read 10 neuroscience papers to get this. You can feel it in your body. And I think, that's one thing, if I do nothing else in my lifetime, but teach people how to trust their own bodies, their own feelings, their own, thought processes and patterns, and have the tools to be able to change them so that they can live a better life. But that would be one example anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, the enthusiasm and the determination and the grit that you've got for this and for doing it. And for doing it, first of all, probably for yourself, and now for other people, and now for practitioners who do it for other people, which is just exponential.
Yeah.
It pours out of you. And I'm curious about when you think about that, and then you think back to that moment with the Bible, is there a connection there between those two things?
I think I always knew and I'm sure everybody listening as well, also, if they go searching for it, they will have a knowing of why they're here and what their purpose is, etc. I had a knowing at that age that there was something. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know. I couldn't put it into words for you, but there was just that feeling, and it was from that experience of first being able to kind of connect into myself and to get curious about why am I here and how do I work, and then I wonder, do other people work in a similar way? And then observing other people and just being interested in it,
I love it. I could talk about this stuff all day long, as you can probably tell. So, Moira, I'm wondering what your question is going to be for our next guest.
Right. Just going to go, this probably now is, I shouldn't say it's going to be a hard one, because I don't know. Maybe the person will find this really easy to answer, but I would be interested, and I'll be listening to the podcast now because I'll be interested in their answer. I'd be interested in their slant on forgiveness.
Okay, what's your slant on forgiveness?
What's your slant on forgiveness? So what I mean by that is that, do you think it's necessary to forgive? And if you do, what's your slant on it? And also, do you think that it's not necessary? It's not something that is needed to happen. Yeah. Because I have my own thoughts on that, and I tell you what they are. They are that I believe that we don't need to forgive, because if we understand truly what's going on, there's no place for it to be something that we need to do. However, I would love somebody that has a slightly different understanding of it, because I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying this is, and I can't get beyond that. But I really love and I think where I learned most stuff and got my deepest realizations was when I had an idea about something or an opinion, and somebody would come in with a slightly different one. And between us, rather than fight or argue, because we know that, I'd be curious about, well, how do you think that? Where did that go? And between us both being curious, we would have created an idea bigger than both of us. And then go, oh my God, that now is my truth.
Love it. I love it, yeah, because I have some thoughts on forgiveness as well, so I'm equally curious now as well to hear what they say. Okay, great. Well, when they've answered and the podcast is published, we'll tag you in the comments more, and you can tune in and see what they say. Oh, thank you so much for your time. And as a closing word, what would you like to say?
Oh, I would just like to say to anybody that's listening, and no matter what's going on in your life, and we all experience really hard things and really amazing things, but if you're going through stuff that's not easy, there is always a way out. There always is. And I'm not saying that just, oh, my clients get results. Clients of so many people get results. So just go and ask for the help, and don't be ashamed like I was, go with curiosity. Just go, I'm curious to find out the answer because I'm feeling SHIT or whatever it is. And just go being curious rather than feeling there's something wrong with you, or that you're broken or what. You're not broken. You're just having a human experience. That's it, and
I love that.
Help. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I always say to people, and what's the third option?
Well, I love that.
Yeah. I always say to people, because you often get people, who are in a bind, and it's like this or that, and I'm like, and what's the third option?
Fabulous.
Yeah, I love that.
Fabulous.
Okay. Thank you so much, Moira.
You are so welcome, John. So welcome. Thank you for having me. It was really lovely. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. I'm curious about what this conversation has stimulated for you. Thoughts, feelings, curiosity. If this episode intrigued you, Hit follow to be notified about new episodes. I know these conversations are valuable to me, and if you think they're valuable too, please do leave a review. Leaving a review allows more people to discover the podcast. You can scroll down to ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts and click write a review. You can also connect with Becoming You on Instagram and TikTok by searching the handle at becoming_you__. The links are in the show notes too. You can also visit www.becomingyou.ie to explore the idea of becoming yourself. Thanks for tuning in. Bye for now.